Terence, how did you find Carnivore?
Do you know, Dave, I had a very odd and peculiar feeling that you might just ask me that question. And, I think my answer is going to be very similar to so many of your guests, which is basically kind of almost a process of osmosis. I've always been extremely interested in nutrition, because I've had health issues all my life. And obviously there's a very important connection between health and nutrition. And so I was on a lot of vegan and vegetarian sites because that was my thing then. And slowly, the opposite camp's viewpoints started to filter through. I would say, and then there was a tipping point when somebody lent me a book called The Vegetarian Myth, which you may have heard of, Leary Keith, and I was already moving towards through health issues, thinking about changing my diet, but it was reading her book that really triggered that final decision to go carnivore. She just makes such a compelling argument, Dave, she convinced me, and then on top of that, personal experience reinforced that new attitude. So that was it.
So can I just confirm? You said you were on vegan vegetarian sites, but you were actually a vegan before or a vegetarian?
Do you know, I suppose about 20, 25 years ago, I turned vegetarian. And then about 5, 6, maybe 7 years ago, I went vegan. And under the misapprehension that I might be doing myself good and the planet good, I now realize how very wrong I was. But I'd quickly interject, Dave, that I think the motivation of vegans and vegetarians is extremely good. And I applaud it, because their issue is with their own health and the health of the planet, and that is to be applauded. But I would say they are deeply misguided, and as I was, and that's a curious thing as well, Dave, to come to the realization, as Leary Keith says in her book, that you have been, not only have you been wrong all of your life about something you felt very passionate about, but you've also been very passionate about it. And I look back and think about how sort of grumpy and angry I used to get about carnivores, and realised that was probably now vitamin B12 deficiency, amongst other nutritive deficiencies. So huge change of attitude, and that's quite something to deal with. I think the psychological aspect of changing to carnivore is something that we need to explore more for people, I think.
Yeah. So what was that process like of transitioning over?
Very slow. Kicking and screaming in many ways, because as I mentioned a moment ago, my vegetarian soul was against it. But excuse me, repeating myself, Dave. But reading Leary Keith's book really was a game changer, a total game changer, because she put things into perspectives that I'd never thought before. I'd never realised about the damage monocultures had done. I had a vague idea of it, of course, but I suppose we all do have. But I heard detailing exactly how destructive modern agriculture is to the planet and to the human individual really convinced me. That was a tipping point for sure. And I'd recommend that book to anybody who's got any doubts. Or occasionally, I don't agree with everything she says. I think she feels that there's too many people on the planet. I don't think that's the case. I think there's room for us all, but we've got to learn to live sustainably. And that means a complete and radical overhaul to the way we produce and consume food. Otherwise, we're all doomed. He said cheerily.
Moving over, I mean, how did you do it? Was it a bit like when you're giving up a strong medicine? Were you kind of going slowly down, introducing meat like that, and then cutting out the veggies, or?
Not really, Dave. I guess, I'm extremely practiced at giving up things that are bad for me. As I mentioned, I lived 10 years in Amsterdam. Those years during the 80s were extremely hedonistic and involved the consumption of a great deal of drinking drugs, wine, women, and so on. Wonderful times, but price to pay. So one by one, I've had to give up alcohol, caffeine, nicotine, saccharides have been the last, really. So yeah, now I'm quite practiced at it. And to be honest, I think of all the things I've had to give up, sugar has been the hardest. And one thing I would say to anybody who's struggling with it, stick with it, because it might take you months or even years to convert your body from burning sugars to burning ketones, glucose to ketones. And Yeah, it was a long and, I have to say, rather difficult process. But I would say to anybody, stick with it, because the rewards are there. But it depends in some part, really, I suppose, Dave, from the point from which you start. And I was extremely ill. Do you mind me just mentioning that I had in childhood a disease called Perthes disease? It's actually legg-calve-perthes syndrome. It's a horrible thing. It melted away my right hip when I was 5, 6 years old, hospitalised me for over a year. I had to have heavy weights put on the end of my leg to stop it withering, which was not entirely successful. So, I've had to have remedial operations on it. I think I've had 3 operations, and the last one was a complete replacement of my hip joint. It was about 21 years ago. So I've lived with a great deal of pain all my life. It's a horrible disease. I wouldn't wish it on anybody. And as I mentioned earlier, realizing there's a very strong connection between pain and my mental attitude and the food I was consuming. I've always been very interested in nutrition, but I've just been misled, basically, I would say, by the current propaganda. It was not easy. It was worth sticking with, but it's not an overnight thing. It took, I think, when I said to you I was 27 months carnivore, and I checked, and that's not actually strictly true, because I think for the first full year of that, I was very much in the transitional stage. So it was not easy, but as I say, well worth doing.
Yeah. So when you did start that transition, I mean, how are you feeling?
Rough, but now I've got a consequence of my bone disease is that there's spurs of bone all over my spine, in my shoulder blade, and so forth, that crush into nerves. And it's the problem. The issue really is when I lay down, it becomes utterly unbearable, and my arms go very, very numb, and at the same time, they're stingingly painful. Well, I won't go on too much about it. It's boring to hear about other people's ailments, isn't it? But it meant that my sleep was extraordinarily broken, and I was quite compensate for the extreme tiredness with lots of sugar during the day. I didn't realise that at the time, but that's what was actually happening. I had to do something, basically. I was in such a state, and I think the overconsumption of sugars and so forth had caused an overgrowth of candida in my system, or candida, which meant a horribly swollen stomach, white tongue in the mornings, and itchiness in places where you don't want itchiness. And it got to the point where I absolutely had to do something, and it was coinciding with getting lots of information, as I say, from the sites, carnivore sites. And then I was supposed, actually kind of, not only Leary Keith's book, The Vegetarian Myth, it was that, but it was also all the testimonials. And if I can say here, Dave, that your channel is one of the ones that have been extremely supportive of me, because I just have to scroll down and read testimonial after testimonial after testimonial, all more or less saying the same thing, that their life has been radically improved by the adoption of a carnivore diet. So when you read not one but 10 but 100 like that, then you start to think, well, there's something in this. And that was that was, I think, there's a combination of having this extreme pain, this candida overgrowth, this sleeplessness, this desperation, I suppose, to do something. I was looking at, to be honest, I'm too positive a person to go for that, but some nights the pain was so intense, that the sleeplessness was so chronic, that I just didn't want to know anymore. So finding carnivore has actually, I think, been pretty much a lifesaver.
So what kind of relief did you get once you were on carnivore? I mean, that seems pretty a pretty major thing, that when you lay down, you're in excruciating pain.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's awful.
Did that improve with carnivore, or did it help with any part of that?
Sorry, don't mean to speak over you. I would say that it has improved beyond recognition, and I can sleep now. And that is, if you can sleep, you can recuperate. If you can't sleep, you can't. And I just go through a very brief list, Dave, of what I've noticed. The first thing I noticed, I think, within about 2 or 3 weeks, was an improvement in eyesight. Colours seemed brighter, and images were sharper, and it came as sort of remarkable to me now. And I realised that that's probably because I wasn't getting enough retinol, vitamin A. I was eating lots of carrots, but as you know, beta carotene doesn't convert terribly well to vitamin A. So that was one of the first things I noticed. The next thing I noticed was I've always had extremely dry skin, and my skin started to become much less dry, less flaky, less itchy, which is wonderful. My sinuses cleared. I've always had issues with sinuses and lungs, and they've cleared completely. I've no problems at all there, less mucus generally. I had a lot of heart palpitations, I think partly from the sleeplessness, partly from the poor diet, and they've gone completely, and that's an enormous relief. You can imagine how uncomfortable waking up and finding your heart running 180 in the mornings is. So that's gone completely. I think no gas, no bloating. Again, with my heavily plant-based diet, I was getting a lot of gas and bloating. In fact, it could be quite embarrassing at times. And that's gone. That's gone. I would say completely. Yeah, pretty much. Again, probably not best to go into too many details there, but I think the main thing was a general reduction in arthritic pain, and this is the big one. This is what it was really all about for me, Dave. It really wasn't anything to do with philosophy or morals or ethics or anything. I have to say that basically I realized I was in so much less pain, and that reduction in pain meant that I could sleep, and that sleep meant I could recuperate. So you instead of being in a vicious downward cycle, it's a beneficial upward cycle, and that has been absolutely marvelous. But they're the physical aspects, and there is, of course, extremely important. Now, the mind and the body are one, really. It's super connected, and of course, when the body is miserable, the mind has trouble being happy. I mean, it's not impossible, but it's difficult. And I think this is the big one, Dave. This is for me, something we don't emphasize enough as carnivores is the amazing difference to your mental clarity, the lack of brain fog, the improved memory, the lack of mood swings, which is marvelous. And I honestly don't think I used to get very depressed with the pain and sort of degree of poverty and so forth. I've got a pension there, so that's not so bad. But yeah, I used to get so depressed with it, and that depression's gone completely. About 3 or 4 months ago, I had sort of 20 minutes of misery, and I couldn't understand where it came from because I was so unused to, getting these mood swings, which were very much part of my life before. So that's great. And another issue, which has been great for me, is I've always been a bit shy, and I find I have much greater personal confidence. I can talk to people with more confidence now. I can go on the street and not worry that I'm so thin looking and so forth. Yeah, that's been absolutely wonderful.
Wow.
This is the first page of notes.
So, I'm really interested to talk about the pain because you've lived with that for so long.
Mm-hmm. 60 years. 60 years.
Can you contrast, like, how many hours sleep would you have got, I don't know, 10 years ago versus how many hours consistent sleep would you get now?
Okay, well, sorry, there's a dumper going past. There's a lot of construction in this village. We're very constructive here. Yeah, in answer to that question, Dave, in November the 20th of 2011, I woke up in the most excruciating pain. I couldn't believe it. My first night at home, and I woke up with this incredible burning pain in my neck, and that turned out to be the first collapsing disc. And now I've got 3 discs that have collapsed in my neck, and I've got very little motion. It's a little bit there, but not a lot. So you can imagine that the pain of that absolutely excruciating, and over a long time. So that was 11, 12 years ago. And for the following 5, 6 years, it just got worse and worse and worse. And I was dealing with ridiculous amounts of pain, not just from the Perthes disease, from my collapsed hip, but from my spinal column, and particularly my cervical spine. So that for me is the thing that the carnivore diet has brought me above all else, is a freedom from, well, not freedom from pain. I still live with a lot of pain, but it's to reduce the point, as I mentioned earlier, where I can sleep, and the lack of the other aspects of mental improvements with carnivore have meant that I can't recognize myself, say, Dave, from 5 years ago. I'm in such a better place now.
So, sorry, just to contrast the hours, like what would you have been sleeping before
Sorry,
you woke up out of?
I didn't ask a question properly, Dave. Sorry. Yes, no, I would have great trouble getting to sleep, and I would wake up every 20 minutes or half an hour. If I ever got like three-quarters of an hour, it would be something like a miracle. And but what happened over a period of years is I think my mind or my body learned to compress the sleep cycle down to three-quarters of an hour, half an hour, and so I was getting complete cycles, but very short, and maybe a dozen during the night. So cumulatively, I'd get almost enough sleep, but still pretty damn miserable. And now, what a contrast! I've learned to rearrange my pillows and my bedding a little bit more successfully now. That helps. But it's just wonderful now, Dave. I can go to sleep almost as soon as my head hits the pillow, and I do wake up with pain in the neck and sometimes for pee, but I can go straight back to sleep again, which I never could before. And so what I tend to get now is maybe 3-4 tranches of 1.5 to 2.5 hours of sleep, and then cumulatively that's 6-7 hours, 8 hours. That's enough. Previously, it certainly wasn't. So, as I say, a huge element or plank of carnivore has been this.
So, how are you eating day to day now?
So yeah, that's in the mornings. I would tend to put a slow cooker on with maybe half a kilo of these chunks of beef. Absolutely delicious. It slowly cooks all day, and I add usually a little bit of turmeric, ginger, garlic, and onions sometimes, but not all the time, and only in very, very small quantities, just to give a little bit of flavour. And I find a tiny little bit of fibre helps. Too much is a problem, but just that little bit helps. So that would tend to be my main meal, the evening meal. But in the mornings, I enjoy an absolutely fabulous breakfast. I don't think I've ever enjoyed my breakfast as much as I do now, and it's always the same. It's rather similar to yours, I think. It's hamburger meat with organic eggs, and I've been buying bacon from a local organic farm, and it is so delicious. So in the mornings, that's pretty much. Well, I say mornings. Often I try to not eat too early. So if I'm hungry, I will. But if I'm not hungry, I wait till midday, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, and like a lot of people, try and keep my this famous eating window. I try and keep it reasonably small.
What has happened with your relationship with friends who may have been vegan or vegetarian before? Have you talked to anyone
Oh,
about your
boringly
switch
so.
to carnivore?
Do you know? I think it's a bit like for some people finding Jesus. You can't stop talking about it. Well, I haven't found Jesus, but he hasn't found me either, truth to tell. But in finding carnivore, I have become rather evangelical. And do you know what surprises me, Dave, is the positivity of the responses I get. Even with vegan and vegetarian friends who are starting to sort of scratch their chins a little bit and thinking, "Oh, what's happened to Terry? What's happened to the man? He's improved beyond recognition, and maybe it's this diet he's going on about." So yeah, I've not been angrily rejected by anybody, or not in my personal life anyway. And no, it's been remarkably positive. Yeah. I think partly it's because I've been so passionate about it. People can, you become the living proof of what you're talking about. When people can see how happy you are, how positive you are, how your health has improved, how you're doing stuff that you haven't done for years, then they start to think, well, yeah, maybe there's something in this. And I think better than anybody that with all of these interviews you've had, how it's very much word of mouth, isn't it? We're not going to get through on the mainstream media. They're not interested. They're too much behind the big corporations, etc. They're too corrupted. They're too venal, I think is the word. And so we've got to do it by gentlemen such as yourself. There's one thing, Dave, I think that has been an issue. And again, Leary Keith points out that when you've been so passionate about a vegetarian and vegan diet for so long, you've got a little bit of egg, quite literally, egg on your face, because you have to turn around and say, well, look, I'm sorry, I was wrong. And I was passionately wrong. And that's quite something. And not just for 10 minutes, but for decades. So, yeah, that's something to deal with. I've dealt with that now, but the initial year of sort of, the psychological aspects of dealing with your own foolishness. I say foolishness, that's unfair. It's we're extremely misinformed on almost every subject, politically, economically, socially. We are deeply misinformed by the media that we're born into. We're literally pickled in commercial and political untruths, and most people just don't wake up from that. again, I think Carnivore has been excellent in a curious way. It has. I've always challenged the mainstream of anything, but Carnivore has really put that into hyperdrive because all of the things I've learned and been taught and sort of sacred Bibles of vegetarianism and so on turned out to be completely wrong. And I was so passionate about it, and so I have to say, well, put my hands up. I'm sorry. Yeah, I was wrong. Please forgive me.
I think though, that shows very strong character to be able to say, okay, well, I advocated for this because I thought that this was the right thing at the time, but now I've changed my view because I've been presented with different evidence, right?
Absolutely.
I mean,
Yeah.
that's what politicians can't do usually, and that's why we have no respect for them.
You've summed up succinctly, Dave. Exactly the case. I think of I don't know if I mentioned the name, but there's a guy called John Campbell who does investigates the COVID situation. I don't know if you've heard of this doctor. He's a bit controversial, but he has behind him these days a poster that says "Follow the evidence wherever it leads." And I think that's a marvelous mantra. Forget your preconceptions, look at the evidence, and follow it. And if it means that you've been wrong, well, accept it, swallow that. Yeah. I think when chatting to, listening rather to Ken Berry once, and this is an important point. I think that we have to be kind towards those who disagree with us, and it's very passionate. Food and veganism and carnivore is very excites a lot of passions, and people get very angry and upset. And I think as carnivores, I think we have to. This sounds very pious, doesn't it? I think we have to be kind and patient with those who challenge us because they're not stupid. They were like I was, misinformed. And so gently inform people. And if they push back against that, well, just be kind and understand that, they're very wedded to these ideas and they've been hammered into them all of their lives. And it's unrealistic to expect people to just, click change. Even when presented with new evidence, and you've heard of cognitive dissonance, Dave, no doubt, where people tend to reject any evidence that doesn't fit in with their preconceived worldview. So you've got to get over that, and that is very hard, But we need to be kind to those who disagree with this. I think not just on this issue, but on all issues, of course. And as I say, I think explain to people the ethics behind it and not what they think. We're not evil, blood-soaked planet destroyers.
So if someone came to you and said they wanted to start carnivore, what advice would you give them?
I'd say, yeah, definitely go for it. Look at the huge amount of information available now about the benefits of a carnivore diet. And above all, read The Vegetarian Myth by Leary Keith, because her argument is very, very compelling. And I think once you've read it, you can see the sense in what she's saying. So, yeah, that's what I would say to anybody. Do it. It's worth it. It's difficult. You'll have problems along the way, but you're going to feel so much better that you wish you'd have done it decades ago. That's really my only regret about carnivore. Seriously, Dave, is that I didn't stumble upon it, 30, 40 years ago. I think a lot of the health issues I have now, I could have avoided by a proper human diet, getting the nutrients I needed, which I've been missing for literally decades.
So if people want to reach out to you, Terence, how can they get in contact?
Well, I'm on email, of course.
Well, Terence, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story. I really appreciate your time.
Oh, thank you, Dave.